jobs, although not into the urban high skill, but they can also switch. So the difference is smaller than what we observe for the education results. If you have a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can say anything about this at the village level. I'm thinking about the interaction between what's going on with men and women. So the men are the ones who are benefiting, by the younger guys are getting more education. The younger guys seem to be shifting where they're working out of farming, but is there then not any spillover to women's labor market? I mean, maybe on the extensive margin for women, but also
So I'm thinking like
women being pulled into agriculture as men are leaving. Can you see that?
okay, I think that's a good question. Yes. Yeah, and we don't. So this is like the result you see here is like the result of gender equivalent, right? So this is what we observe, but
fine, sure.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm wondering what's going on in agriculture.
Yeah, so basically,
and workers, young.
so basically, you rent out your land to other household in the same village, right?
Yeah.
So they're gonna farm in much more land.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that what's going on? So
Yeah, it is.
Scale
Yes.
increasing among the men who remain in agriculture?
Yes.
Or are women now being drawn?
We didn't
agriculture?
really check particularly for women, but we do see like people who are good at the household who are good at agriculture, they get more farming. They have more time spent on farming. They have more land. Also, you see the increase in household income. Yes, but we didn't check for female particularly. We look at household level.
Yeah,
but we can see. We can check that. Yeah.
I was just thinking of two papers. One is the Rossi paper about structural transformation.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
I think that they have an IV with an education thing. So I kind of would like to know sort of like how is education and structural transformation things line up, how much that might be going through the identify.
Yes.
How much might just be going through purely the I'm gonna get out of agriculture kind of a thing.
Exactly.
And then the first we had a STEG annual conference in Abu Dhabi and Barcelona like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was a paper, I think on China, where there was an instrument, another IV for education.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So in this case, actually suggests that if you do IV here, it's a bit problematic because for education outcome and occupation choices, you identify two different compliance. So like our model really suggests that. So so when we finish the paper, I know that we read the human side paper. So we realize it's so close. But we also notice the difference here. Actually, point suggesting that just doing the IV like that, kind of overestimate because you are looking at different compliance group. Yes.
Sorry. You have about 10 more than 10.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, again, this is repeating myself. So the idea is like for the occupation choices, once I want to highlight is for the older cohort, they're also switching. So might not switch to high skill, but they're switching. So actually we only can identify the cohort set. But for the education results, we might identify a much larger group. And if you really think about identification assumption here, it's not only the common trend, but also if we want to interpret the finding from that education plays an important role that in this cohort effects. So we actually need to think about exclusion restriction. So these occupation switches really only comes from the education increase. And is it possible to? And we try to basically construct additional results, basically combine education results with the occupation results. We create new dummies, and you can see it's really driven by the increase in education. So for example, there is no increases in these two groups. So high school into low skill, nothing. No high school, non-low skill, nothing. It's really driven by the increase here, high school and non-low skill jobs. Okay, so again, the idea is that focus on only switch, security only switcher. That's what literature be focused on. Underestimate misallocation. So ignoring the cohort effects is kind of underestimated long-term misallocation. And we did a bunch of tests like different age cutoff, tax reform, but also urban placebo. So basically ruling out province level policy change. So we don't see anything for the urban in the urban area. And we also replicate in different data sets, give the same picture. So the final exercise we want to show here is really go back to the idea of ROI model. So ROI model is really about comparative advantage, right? So how we can test directly. So it's very difficult to measure ability, especially you want to measure the ability by occupation. That's really hard. So here we're gonna take a different approach. We're gonna proxy the comparative advantage using pre-reform agriculture productive of the household. So that's taking advantage of this data because first it traces individual household long time. Second, it also has a lot of information about agricultural activities and also can link that information to individual data. And the prediction will be if the household is good at farming, so you would expect smaller effects after land reform because there is no incentive for them to choose education. They can continue with the farming jobs. And what we do is exactly like this. So before showing your regression results, I'll just show you some BSAT plot. So on the left-hand side is just pre-policy, and we for pre-policy individuals, and the BSAT plot is about share of individuals who have high school degree as a function of agricultural productivity. Here is really residual agricultural productive within the village. So we're always comparing agricultural productivity within the village to rule out all other kind of heterogeneity in terms of land quality, other things. And you can see really flat. There's not much correlation. But if you look at after reform, so these individuals are kind of born after the reform, experienced land reform already younger when they were younger than age 15. You can see it shift downward. So basically, individual who has lower agricultural productivity from low agricultural productive household increase the most of their education. For individual who from household with very high agricultural productivity, the level actually is much more similar. So you don't see the increase from this group. And this is just kind of before and after. And we can, of course, do proper different diff. And maybe another nice exercise is kind of placebo test is to look at the female. So although the level increased a lot, but that's a general pattern of the female education in China over the years. But you can see there's not much change responding to the agricultural productivity. Really kind of suggesting comparative advantage related to land institution is the most important driving factor here. And just to summarize the results in the regression, so we divide the household by agricultural productivity, and we can look at both time effects and cohort effects. So for time effects, I think most important is this one, household income. You can see both of them see increase in household income. Actually, the magnitude are very similar. So it's not the low, high productivity, time agricultural productivity household kind of lagging behind or other things. So they also enjoy the benefit from the land reform. And also, if you look at the activity after reform, right, they put more days. This is household average, so it's not 0, 1. We can see the increase really in the high productivity household. And again, for the main results, the cohort effects, we see it's really the low productivity household. You see the biggest treatment effect, suggesting that it's really the comparative advantage of playing the role to shape the education choices. Unfortunately, for this data, we can only observe them in 2013. So we cannot look at occupation choices. So we only look at the high school decision here. Okay, so to conclude, so we look at land reform in China and find that improved land security kind of has time effects, basically improves land reallocation, labor reallocation between agriculture and non-agriculture. But more importantly, we document the long-run effects. So talent reallocation really driven by the younger cohorts because they can re-optimize education. And if we only focus on the time effects, we kind of underestimate the distortion due to these institution barriers. And another policy implication, not only about the land reform, but also, so here, a bottleneck for older cohort to kind of to reallocate from agriculture to non-agriculture is education. So after age 15, it's very difficult for them to redo the education. So it suggests that so if there is some education reform, it can complement to the land reform, which might generate much bigger economic gain for the whole economy. That's my presentation. Thanks. Any questions?
So I guess another way of thinking about what you're saying here, with the cohort effects, you started off saying, well, why does the misallocation persist for so long?
Yeah.
And a part of it is this fact that the older guys can't be optimized.
Yeah.
But another way of saying that is, well, if you don't have the right education infrastructure in place, even the younger guys can't be optimized.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have, that infrastructure there, then that's another reason for the persistence.
Yeah. Also, yeah, actually, that's a really good point. So I didn't mention here, but also most of the literature focuses on agriculture versus non-agriculture.
Right.
But among non-agriculture jobs, you have different types.
Lots of different things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here I don't really see individuals move to professional jobs like lawyers, like government jobs. So which is not captured, only focus on time impact, right? So this will not show up because they don't have enough skills or human capital preparation. Yeah. For the older guys. Yeah.
And in your setting, it's actually this transition to, was it completing high school or just getting high school? It's really low. For the younger guys.
Entering high school.
And so just entering high school.
Yes, yes. Yeah. That's age 15. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we are doing great on time. I think there is another coffee break scheduled, and I'm gonna check what time we're supposed to get. We have one more paper in the session, and we will start again at 4 o'clock. Then, thanks. Thank you for presenting.
I thought we were gonna put that on.
Yeah, we didn't do that for more. Yes. So this education is complementary to the factories. Yeah, so. So
And do we have to reshare?
No, it's showing already, and we just unmuted ourselves so that the recording. Yeah, this. Page. We're watching you there on your smartphone.
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, you.
I don't have a phone. It's actually not a phone. It's just the key to my car. But it has this little game that I'm addicted to, and I can pay complete attention to a paper and still play this game. Yeah. The Bobby's. Yes. Yeah.
Let's wait for 2 minutes, I think, but so
This clock is down.
which clock is on time? I have 4:02 on my cell.
Yeah.
And 4 on my watch.
I think people are just downloading their clocks into.
Yeah, let's wait 2 minutes, okay?
People have already looked at this policy, thinking about like gas authority, but not.
I don't think I know.
It's hard. I thought I signed up, but I hadn't. Yeah, somebody's plug it. It's canceled, so then I can get my delay. I can get something.
Like this one, and this one, like what's the name?
The greatest. Where's the great conference you guys?
Yeah.
What is that? So then we come up with this. And then we can substantiate. Which is therefore counted. I don't know. The answer is, but like, can you be specific and reading? One, you just like represent just one model.
Went through your paper, no? That was about like land policy before, and basically moving from a very
Yes, I see.
plain allocation format.
So you're thinking like land is allocation. Like, don't not the most productive at the most land, but that's like
Yeah.
behind the others.
All right. I think we should get started. This is our final paper of the day. We have two presenters for the paper. So we're very happy to welcome Maureen Lucy and Rich Pima. So about search frictions. I am employed in the South African labor market, so 50 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for including our paper in the program. So I want to quickly explain that I have to present as Noreen is a graduate student at the University of Pretoria, and she'll be presenting part of the paper, and then I'll be presenting the rest. It's very much work in progress, so we are really open to any feedback and comments that can help us improve it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So our paper looks at the subscription employees in the South African labor market. It has been well documented that South Africa has been facing a persistent high unemployment problem since its transition to democracy. But what's unique about South Africa is that it additionally faces the challenge where those excluded from wage employment are more likely to be unemployed rather than working in informal or account jobs. But this is not like other emerging economies where the unemployment rates are lower because those that do not find jobs in the formal sector, they are able to make some sort of livelihood in the informal sector. So this means that South Africa has a high unemployment problem with loss of employment compared to other emerging economies which have low unemployment and high self-employment. much of the existing debate in South Africa has focused on the labor market regulations and the existence of strong labor market institutions such as like minimum wages and labor market unions as potential challenges that could drive an exceeding and high unemployment rate in South Africa. But an alternative and less explored explanation can be offered by the search and matching theory. So based on this theory, it says that it takes time, effort, and resources for jobless workers to match with firms with vacancies. So such frictions can also prevent the reallocation of labor across firms or sectors, and this may be amplified by different socioeconomic characteristics such as age, gender, etc. So our research question is, to what extent can frictions in the South African labor market help explain the persistently high unemployment in the country? Our approach is we built a search and matching model calibrated to match key moments of the South African labor market. And in particular, we calibrate our model to match the transition flows between unemployment, wage employment, and self-employment. Our findings is that there exist some complementarities between wage employment and self-employment. And the policy implications is that promoting the expansion of formal wage employment in South Africa may also stimulate self-employment. So our literature relates to different strands. One of the main strands is the Diamond, Mortensen, and Pissarelli's framework, where the unemployment arises from search and matching frictions in the labor market. And this model has, in the literature, there are like several extensions which incorporate wage rigidity, firm heterogeneity, segmentation, and informality. The second strand that our paper relates to is labor market hysteresis, where temporary shocks, for instance, like recession, can have long-lasting negative effects in the economy. And the third strand of literature is the labor market frictions in developing countries. So some of the labor market frictions that have been documented is monopsony power, informality, and human capital. So with monopsony power, there exists a wedge between the marginal product of labor and the wages. And the existence of informality is that the taxes and regulations can distort wages and affect the reallocation of labor across sectors. And the third is the human capital labor market friction. With this, so with human capital, it interacts with labor market friction such that frictions can reduce returns to education and can also affect the on-job skill accumulation. So some of these labor market friction that have been discussed in South Africa. One of this is monopsony power. We are following Bassier and using the matched employer-employee tax data in South Africa. He estimated the firm labor supply elasticity to be 0.75, and that's very low compared to most of the industrialized economies. So this suggests that there exists a substantial wage setting power in South Africa. And also, this was done for also different sectors in South Africa, and also found that the labor supply elasticity is low for the wholesale and retail sector, which suggests there is large monopsony power in one of the largest employment sectors in South Africa. The other friction is human capital. So these are just descriptive stats. So we see that over time. Oh, yes.
I didn't find that really close because I don't know those papers.
Okay.
Is that
Oh,
the aggregate labor supply elasticity, or is that the labor supply elasticity that individual firm faces? Because you could have a very inelastic, like sectoral labor supply, but no firm has enough market power to internalize that.
You mean the labor supply elasticity for the wholesale and retail sector? You mean the first?
I guess I'm thinking about. Yeah, because the first one is firm level.
That's the firm
But the
level.
wholesale and resale one. Is that also firm level or that's the overall?
So that's firm level for the firms in the wholesale and retail sector.
It is, okay, all right, okay, thanks.
So the other when we look at human capital, we see that over time, there's been an increase in education attainment. Like you can see from this particular graph that educational attainment of the labor force in South Africa has been increasing over time. But the highest unemployment rates in South Africa are experienced for those who have not completed secondary school education. And informality, we see that the informal sector in South Africa accounts for approximately 21% of total employment. This is the 21% is in 2024, but you can see that over time it has also been varying significantly. So now we look at the average worker flows and stocks. This table presents the results for the average monthly implied labor market flow and stocks over the full sample period between 2008 to 2024, and it was computed using the quarterly labor force survey in South Africa. So what we observe is that approximately 0.4% of the wage employed transition to self-employment, while approximately 1.2% switched to unemployment. And we also observed that approximately 0.9% of the unemployed switched to self-employment, while 3.8% switched to wage employment. I've also plotted here the share of workers who switch from unemployment to self-employment and wage employment over time. And you can see that the share of workers who switch from unemployment to wage employment is approximately, on average, 4 times higher than the share of workers who switch from unemployment to self-employment. And the last graph is the share of workers who switch from self-employment and wage employment to being unemployed. And we observe so mostly we observe that the share of the workers who switch from being self-employed to unemployment, it's higher compared to those who switch from wage employment to unemployment. And we observe significant spikes, particularly like during around, let's say, COVID. You could see that there's a significantly higher number of workers who switch from self-employment to unemployment compared to those who switch from wage employment to unemployment.
Among the wage employment, can you distinguish between public sector workers versus private sector workers? Because there was a paper about how the large public sector in South Africa attracted a lot of workers who want to work for them, and then they want to remain unemployed to eventually get a public sector job.
Yes, from the QLFS, from one end, you are able to distinguish between public sector and private sector workers.
Okay, thank you very much, Noel. So yeah, that actually concludes our evidence. So basically, the main point of those evidence is kind of like to provide like at least some form of stylized facts about, the data, how important labor market frictions could be. So in South Africa, and then the idea is later on to kind of like build a model. So that would kind of like that indeed would kind of like extend so well-known seminal paper. So the Diamond Mortensen decided as a framework to include self-employment because it has been shown to be a key characteristics of the labor markets in developing and emerging economies. Through that, South Africa is a peculiar case because self-employment in South Africa is quite low compared to the average of other emerging even developing economies. So basically what we do here, we draw from Ruder, Trappist, Nick's Car, but mostly from Marcus Tape and Marcus Bosch. So, and we kind of like build a frictional labor market. So that would combine, so again, DMP framework with those two sectors of development models like in Benaja and Newman. So, and basically, but we kind of like depart a little bit from what Marcus has done. So in Marcus, we kind of like, Marcus allows for both like wage employment, and kind of like, screen wage employment and unscreened wage employment to kind of like account for tenure. So in the, tenure characteristics. So, but we try to abstract from that because of data availability, but also to make a little bit the framework simpler and focus on the effect of fictions on various outcomes. So, and the model also allows for kind of like, through the labor market frictions, allows for firms and job seeker to kind of like match. And then it would allow like the unemployed to choose between indeed either, searching for jobs or self-employing themselves. And then, and one particular, feature of this model is that it will kind of like allow to endogenously generate the flows. So among those three observables, unemployed, wage employed, and self-employed. And so, and now to be specific of those flows as well as the state. So basically, we denote the measures by U for unemployment, little n for wage employment, and E for self-employment. And for the transition matrix, so if we denote it by P, so the flow rate between state A and A prime, would kind of like be expressed as we know, so like either from wage employment to self-employment, wage employment to unemployment, etc. And in most of, so for this transition matrix, so most of the probabilities, so the transition probabilities, all of them are endogenous, except for the probability of moving from self-employment to unemployment, which is exogenous in our setting here. And finally, so the wage employment sector, so has kind of like indeed firms, so that kind of like produce and varies, by productivity and workers. And so once those firms have entered the market, so they post vacancies and pay for, a specific cost. So now, the job seekers, they enter the frictional labor market and they search for the vacancies posted by the firms. And indeed, they pass through a sequential and random matching process that, is well known in the literature. So, and our matching function here is quite standard, the standard Papuglas function. So, where we define R here as the funding, the job funding probability, whereas Q is the vacancy filling rate, and both are function of the market tightness theta. So, and finally, because we have self-employment in the model, so when we account for self-employment, so indeed the market tightness is slightly modified to kind of like account for that. So now we look closely at the value functions of the different type of agents in the model. So, like starting with the workers. So, for a worker, the value of employment is given by the Bellman equation in equation 3 here, basically implying that the sum of the income flow, so to the worker, would come from working, so WY, but also the it will also depend on the expected capital loss if, for instance, the job is destroyed following, say, an adverse productivity shock, and the worker indeed becomes self-employed, or the expected value for him to kind of like entering into self-employment, for instance, that's Q, and P here is our discount factor. So, but here, so because the unemployment indeed choose between job search and self-employment, so we can express the value of employment as here. So the maximum between, so the value of search and the potential, the expected value of entry, so into self-employment, from which a startup cost is deducted. When, for instance, the individual has to kind of like start its self-employment opportunity. So, and finally, we think the value of search can be expressed by equation 4 here. So, and here B simply denotes the value for the flow values for unemployment. So now for the first problem, so we the value of employment for a firm, so is the following Bellman equation here. So, and what we had earlier for for the value of kind of like employment for the worker, the match is also subject to productivity shocks. and indeed may be dissolved where, if, for instance, a negative value is held. So is yeah. And then at the new productivity, if the worker has accepted, other opportunities like, outside options like self-employment. So, and the firm, normally, they also post vacancies as I explained earlier. So they pay a cost KV to post their vacancies. And the vacancy has the following value function here. And the vacancy will be filled with a given probability, so Q, which is here abstract from the market tightness, but in most of all those equations, so they are all functions of the market tightness as well. So, and with 3 and 3, then, equation 6 reduces to equation 7 here. So for the wage determination, so we kind of like, once we have a match, so the firm and worker will bargain, so using a Nash bargaining scheme. So, and the workers, if we denote by eta, the workers' bargaining power, so the sharing rule is as in equation 8 here. And when we substitute it, we substitute, for the expressions of the value of employment to the worker and to the firms into equation 8, it yields the expression in equation 9 here. And which, if we substitute back into equation 5, let me quickly go back. Equation 5 again being, the value of, okay. Equation 5, being the value of employment for the firm. So when we do that, we end up with an expression here in the equation. I did not write down the expression, but when we substitute, so for the expression, in equation 9 into the Bellman equation for the firm, so we get actually. And we take into account that there's a sharing rule basically. So through the bargaining. So and so basically, the firm and the worker would clearly agree that they would kind of like operate a match that would generate non-negative surplus. And the worst case, the worst match would be the situation where we have job destruction, that is J of R equals 0. So now, finally, for self-employment, we think of the value of ongoing self-employment with a given productivity Z as given in equation 10 here. So basically implying that the self-employment income Z will flow until either exit, so like into unemployment, or switch to wage employment. So. And this indeed would occur, so with a certain probability if a new match is preferable to self-employment. And finally, the self-employment entrants, those who kind of like for the first time kind of like enter into self-employment, they will draw the productivity Z so that the expected value of entry into self-employment Q is expressed like in equation 11 here. And again, because of those reservation productivities for low draw, so it would be indeed preferable to return to unemployment. So, and that allows us to kind of like quickly define the equilibrium here. So it's just, the equilibrium will consist of, those value functions I presented earlier for the worker, the firm, and the self-employed, and also values such as unemployment surge, expected value of entering self-employment and vacancy, the transition matrix, the various distributions for the states, and as well as a mass for the unemployment measure, various productivity thresholds, policy functions, but also some few numbers. So all together allowing for the individuals and firms to behave optimally. So now turning to our model calibration. So basically what we do here, we kind of like follow closely the paper by Marcus, and we set the values, most of those values you can see up here close to Marcus values. And then for the internally calibrated parameters, basically we combine calibration and model solution following the algorithm that Marcus proposed. to kind of like, determine the values of those other parameters. And we do so also by taking into account some data-driven transition probabilities. So we kind of like determine those parameters such that they match some of those data-driven transition probabilities as well as other moments out there. Okay. Yes.
And the Marcos paper is also on South Africa.
The Marcus paper is actually on a set of countries that includes South Africa, basically. So in his application, so he has like I think South Africa, Mexico, and 2 other countries, including the US, if I remember well. But what we do in here, we kind of like we borrow this model, but mostly we are interested in kind of investigating some policy implications, basically, of the model for South Africa. Yeah.
So the model is the same, but the question you guys are after is different?
Yeah, the model, we are definitely after, but primarily after indeed understanding how important labor market frictions can be in explaining the high unemployment in South Africa. And one way to think of it is through some policy experiments. So basically, when we have the model and we produce some kind of like, rationalizable behavior, I mean, it kind of like more or less match quite well the data and generate some quite well-known empirical regularities. Our plan is to then use it, for some policy experiment, like to look into some specific labor market regulations and other policies that have been adopted in the country. So,
and what is Marcus used his model for?
In his model, I think he's also investigating, basically, he wanted to make the case of the importance of labor market frictions in explaining actually cross-country variations, because he's looking at a huge set of countries as well. And but he does not really look closely into the type of policy experiments that we have in mind to try and understand the unemployment rate in South Africa.
I'm sorry to keep but what are the cross-country variation and what that he's interested in? Is it also self-employment or?
So in his model, it also has self-employment along with unemployment and wage employment. In his setting, he has like screen wage employment and unscreened wage employment to control for this 10-year stuff. And then he looked at it. First, he presented a bunch of salary facts about cross countries evidence, so based on these variables and others, and then he kind of like built this model to see how he tried to. I think so, to see how they will kind of like capture some of those, empirical irregularities. But he's not a priori interested in some policy experiments of the kind we have in mind.
His key moment is the unemployment to self-employment ratio.
Yes.
Across countries, across GDP per capita.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So, okay, so this brings us to our baseline results. So we start here. I'm presenting here quickly the model implied transition matrix. So okay, I should have maybe put it together with the empirical version of it. But again, we have not attempted to kind of like get our model to match, the transition probabilities across all states. We've matched few of them, especially like those, like those on the first row and maybe some few others. But what we get here, especially for our model implied stocks, interestingly, they look more or less close to what we have in the data. And all these are preliminary results. So, and basically, okay, even though basically in our calibration strategy, we have not targeted those specific stocks. So we kind of like somehow the model has done a quite okay job by trying to match them more or less closely. So now our main exercise is here. So basically, where we indeed try to understand how changes in the variables down here. So productivity and vacancy posted cost. So and the cost for entering self-employment and also interacting productively and vacancy posting cost friction. So how it would affect some of the labor market variables here. So basically, we as you can see here, so an adverse productivity shock when we increase basically lambda by 10%, sorry, I've not mentioned the 10% here, but we increase it by 10% each of these variables. So it leads to self-employment increasing by about 0.50%. So and unemployment increasing as well. So by 1.9% as one would expect, because we have an adverse productivity shock. And wage employment decreasing substantially in our setting here and under our calibration by about 2.4%. So, and clearly, so again, because by construction, self-employment and unemployment increases by the amount by which wage employment increases. And it also leads to both wages, so W bar, average wages. So so this is the output for wage employment, Y bar, and the output for self-employment, Z bar, all of them decreasing. So here, so now, and this regularity can be also observed when we look at another supply side shock, like, higher vacancy costs. So increasing the vacancy posting cost by about 10% will also lead to, qualitatively similar features. But with the particularity that, somehow, even though self-employment has increased, one noticed that output in self-employment has decreased, and this seems, as we pointed out in our results earlier, in the summary of the paper, it seems to be kind of like related to some form of complementarities, so between wage employment and self-employment. And so with the vacancy, when we take into when we consider the friction like for entering into self-employment, indeed, when when this cost more or less increases, so indeed it immediately leads to a decrease in self-employment, but it does merely nothing to wage employment, whereas unemployment increases. So and for the various outputs, so wages, self-employment output, and wage employment output, so we don't see any significant difference. And finally, when we interact like the supply side frictions in the like adverse productivity shock, compounded with higher vacancy person costs, we find that the effects are amplified, from the individual effects of those two supply side frictions, which one would expect as well.
So
yes,
two thoughts. Big picture on the model. I think the motivation, I would think, what's surprising with South African self-employment being very low.
Yeah.
Is this idea that self-employment seems to be like an outside option available to anybody. So so think of a world where the search friction for self-employment is very low.
Yeah.
You can always find a self-employment job. I think that would be one counterfactual to kind of run.
Yes.
I guess the second thing that I would think right away when you say, because I always think of self-employment as being an alternative to unemployment.
Yes.
Where you don't have.
But in South Africa, it's not really the case. And actually, thank you very much for the question, because it allows me to provide a few reasons for that. Basically, the labor market legislation and the regulation in South Africa do not really encourage the people to go and self-employ themselves. So there are kind of like some barriers, in the creation of self-employment opportunities by
They crack down on it or something.
Yeah, there's a paper by some people working like at the University of Cape Town, Arun Borat and some co-authors. So they've shown that because of the legislation, the labor market, tough labor market regulation is really hard to create, your self-employment job. And also there's another problem which is linked with security issues because of a high level of insecurity in the country. So self-employed and Borat and co-authors also find that. So that, people are kind of like reluctant to also create, start their own business. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I feel
Yeah.
is B.
The flow value of unemployment.
The value of unemployment.
Yeah.
Is there more so? I mean, my understanding of South Africa actually is like I don't know about whether there's formal, what formal unemployment compensation is, but I think that the formal retirement is pretty generous, and so people will often live. Young people will live with older people. It's maybe totally wrong. Let's explain to me.
Through that, we haven't looked
I would like to see comparative statistics with B. And like where the various calibrations of B could explain some of that. Which is just that it's I don't become self-employed just because it's not that bad being unemployed.
Yeah. No, yes, sir, please.
It's more of a general question, but are you including unpaid workers anywhere in one of those three categories? Like unpaid family workers?
Unpaid workers are not explicitly included here.
The situation is in South Africa specifically, but for example, for Uganda, I think it's like 10 to 20% of the workforce or so. So yeah.
Yeah, like what we know is that we kind of like have in the self-employment mostly own account type of people, but sorry. Yes, we have unpaid family workers indeed in South Africa, but they are not part of the labor force. I think so. I don't know, maybe we may want to carefully check now. Okay. Yes. So another thing, basically, we tried to construct most of those evidence using your paper with colors. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yes, please.
From this, I think you were kind of saying, okay, if I change the cost of entry to self-employment, and that's going to account for some percent of the total self-employment that we see or don't see, and that doesn't seem to be very large relative to either the unemployment rate or what the levels are in the data. And so I don't know what the right counterfactual is, because I also don't know. It would be helpful to tell us a little bit more from the data about what self-employment actually looks like in South Africa, because it is not like you measure it in Uganda. People don't have land. And so the land dispossession of much of the population, I think, means that it's even more costly to enter any kind of self-employment than you might expect in other, similar developing countries.
Yeah.
So when you think about the counterfactuals, I think the one thing, first of all, it would be nice to tell us about what self-employment looks like.
Yeah.
And how that differs to other developing countries, if it does, right? And what sectors are you working in? What kinds of businesses do people have? And then secondly, maybe that helps you think about what size of a cost to entering self-employment there might be, or you might need to look at in your policy counterfactuals. Like a 10% chance may not do anything.
Yes, 10% chance may be quite,
because the barriers to entry are, as you were saying, institutional barriers, but there's these other barriers as well.
Yes, there's other barriers. The barriers which drew our attention were mostly, the institutional barriers, but also the security issue that Borat and co-authors have also highlighted in the paper. I think they also talked about other barriers, but we have not looked closely to them yet. Yeah. So, yeah, there's. Sorry.
Clarification question on this table. So here, like in the baseline, you are already matching the high unemployment rate in South Africa, or this exercise that you are doing with moving the different parameters is to see like if you can match that high unemployment.
No, we've done the baseline exercise. These are just some variation in some of the parameters. So with the baseline calibration, we've run the model and it generated like this transition matrix, and and we can also compute actually all those values here, for the baseline, But then when we, like in a compare, like I mean, we change one of those parameters here, like take lambda, the productivity. So if we have like a negative productivity shock, that increases lambda, it leads to those various changes you see here in the different variables, the different states, and those outputs there. Yeah.
But then what is what it explains?
So basically, it's kind of like okay, it's as the question asked, so it's basically showing the case of how labor market frictions would affect those different variables. The frictions here is that we have like take lambda, we have an adverse productivity shock that would kind of like impair the production capacity of firms, for instance. You see, so how would that affect wages, output in the self-employment sector, or output in the wage employment sector? That's basically what we do, along with the three possible states here. Yeah.
Relating to the mechanism you were describing of this capital loss, is that what you were thinking, this exogenous capital loss that we were thinking of when you think of insecurity? Is it about like, did I understand correct? Is it about like potential threat?
Yeah, potential threat to insecurity, because there are documented data where like in some like suburbs, like less secured suburbs, so people tend to get, their business tend to get robbed. And there were like, at some point, those statistics were quite high.
What was the parameter that governed that? You could look at the role of that parameter in explaining the low rates of self-employment. That would be interesting.
Yes, we can definitely think of it, but in that, we have our value function for self-employment, and we can look closely into it, to see maybe how we would have kind of like alter that parameter and see how it will affect the different outcomes. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Thank you. Next, other questions? Okay. So basically, these are just some few quick preliminary exercises that we could directly immediately conduct. So, but what we are planning to do next is basically to carefully think in terms of the real questions we have in mind. So that's what I was saying earlier. The work is quite much very preliminary and quite incomplete. So basically, we really want to carefully think about those policy experiments here. So we want to say, okay, if our model behaves quite well and can replicate some empirical irregularities, so can we use it like, for some kind of like policy experiments, in line with some concrete, policies that have been adopted in South Africa, like minimum wages and those labor market regulations that I was talking earlier about, but also, some unions, because they're kind of like, these are something like the demand side, the supply side of the labor market. We want also to see if, even though we know that monopsony power is quite prevalent in South Africa, some of our colleagues lately, including Massier and Joshua Badlanda, so they made case that, okay, unions may be also quite important in explaining labor market outcomes in South Africa. So we want to kind of like, maybe, kind of like make a list of some of the key policies and see, how we can think about them through the lens of our model. Basically evaluate them using our model. And one other thing we want to do is to kind of like conduct some sensitivity analysis, because of the issues with the calibration. We, as I was saying, we kind of like rely mostly on the parameters proposed by Marcus in this paper. So we want to at least play around with some of the some of those parameters and see how they affect our main findings. But also think in terms of model assumptions, that is yet to be kind of like we yet have to think about it, but also using various data sample as well. And another thing we want to do first up here is to kind of like perform the kind of analysis that most of the presentation earlier did. So present more elaborated microeconometric evidence, maybe first not claiming causality in some type of correlation type analysis, but also think of a more rigorous causal inference exercises where we will again see how important those labor market frictions may be in explaining the unemployment rate in South Africa. And see if, for instance, those more robust evidence can kind of like help us rationalize some of the findings of our model. So that's it basically. So basically, we show that those supply side disturbances that I highlighted earlier, vacancy person cost or the adverse productivity shock. So they can lead to indeed decrease in wage employment, but also wages and related output. And with the lower wage employment being indeed offset by high unemployment and self-employment. So that again, as I highlighted earlier, so self-employment output drops despite actually its increase. So even though it's marginal, at least according to our parameterization. So it suggests that there's some form of complementarities basically between the wage employment and self-employment sectors, implying that eventually, so if the government can set up policies that can help, promote, the creation of wage employment, it may also help stimulate self-employment. Yeah. So that's basically what we had to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Richard, can you go back to your table, the last that one? I'm just trying to understand if I'm thinking about this. So we've changed, you have the models, you wrote them down, you're doing these changes in the various parameters, but self-employment is not moving very much at all, right? That's a little percentage. So that's like 0.5%, 6.6% minus 0.4%. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, yes.
So it's a 0.5% change in self-employment. There's the maximum change in self-employment is 1%, 1 percentage point.
Yeah.
And so what this is telling me is none of the things that you have done so far make an ounce of difference to the self-employment rate level in the country. Am I understanding that correctly? So within the framework of the model that you've written down, with the shocks that you've played with, the lambda, the K, the KF, there's really nothing. What South Africa needs is an increase in self-employment of 20 percentage points.
Yes.
To do any decent damage to the unemployment rate. There's nothing comes close to making a big difference. And so is one conclusion from this that, this model is telling us that dealing with the frictions is not going to fix the unemployment problem. Maybe I'm misinterpreting how to think about this table.
Yeah, because the way we thought about it, again, we wanted just to see like, how, very simply, basically how, those frictions when they're exacerbated, like through, for instance, a negative productivity shock, so how it would affect those various outcomes there. As you've noticed, self-employment seems to be, and I think we also.
There's nothing much changing at all.
It looks like these shocks are affected, well, except the KF bar, the lambda and the KV seem to be mostly sending people away from wage. It's like harder to form wage employment, but the vast about 2/3 more. Way more than 2/3. The vast majority is going into unemployment. So what you want is that the people that kind of find formal jobs that
are moving into
the self-employment, but that's what
they're not. Eventually, maybe the model is actually capturing these empirical irregularities, right?
Sorry, it sounds like the parameters you're showing have a lot to do with the formation of matches between firms and workers. So it's really about wage employment, but you're holding fixed those characteristics of the economy that make those people not go to self-employment because you calibrated it to match the low self-employment. So it seems like that's why I suggest that it could be interesting to play around with the parameters that drive that, which seem to be the ones that are directly related to self-employment. That's why I was thinking that that probability
We took note of it, yeah.
have a big bite, or I don't know what others had to do directly with self-employment, maybe.
So, I mean, I think they're all inside the KF.
The KF is really,
Right, but if you could break that apart,
Yes,
you might be able to.
Yeah, self-employment, yeah. It's mostly in here, yeah. But basically, maybe, I mean, my way of trying to rationalize the low responses of self-employment through like the experiments, like with the supply side shocks is, again, maybe because, again, for the low self-employment, indeed, the model is more or less calibrated to reflect that. So we would expect self-employment to always, respond more or less marginally. Maybe the only case we notice here is this idea of complementarity that I highlighted when we look at the output of self-employment. But yeah, so.
So what was KF?
KF was a
KF is kind of like the cost of, the cost into self-employment.
of getting into the self-employment.
Well, like setting up your business or your
Exactly.
Sure,
Yeah.
set that thing to zero, set B to zero, you get all the unemployed to be in self-employment immediately. So, I mean, it's not like we don't know how to do it, the question is, what's the reasonable parameter?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But if unemployment means death, there will be no unemployed. people.
Right.
That's what B equals zero means.
Yeah.
But I think the question for you as someone who's South African is like, in the South African context, is that what it is? Is that there really is no unemployment insurance? Is it too high? What are the policies? That's.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if you have a.
There's no unemployment,
Exactly.
but it's the fact that household, because B equals zero means death. Unemployed people live in households where there are pensioners or where there are other employed people. So people find a way of surviving, right? And so one story that is maybe the welfare state is too big, but that's not a palatable policy parameter that you're going to mess around with, right? Another big issue is this entry into self-employment, the fact that people don't have land, first of all, and then secondly, and maybe this is where our friction is also relevant, is the costs of even moving around in a city to find your customer base are so high. And so that's, I think the idea of breaking up within the self-employment sector, what kind of frictions might be going on as you're doing it in the formal sector between workers and firms, that might be an interesting direction to go in.
Just related to your two comments.
Yeah.
If you look at the table, you don't get big impacts, but maybe that's saying 10%.
Yes, Japan development. Yeah, I need to highlight.
We're talking about orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that was mostly it. I don't know if there are other comments or feedback.
I think we're kind of about time. The bus is coming at 5:05, so I think we can close this theme 2 workshop for the day. Thank you, everyone, all the presenters, everyone who came, give comments.
Thanks to Taryn and Rachel for organizing.
And thanks to Rachel for joining us in a different time zone. And all the people who made the videos that's not.
Richard Clouds.
I tried to be to have the Minneapolis survey. They're literally fun.
That wasn't happy with it, but then.